agree, North Melbourne is the team that plays to win for you and me.
North Melbourne Kangaroos, Australian roadkill. The Kangaroos are somewhat of an enigma as they have arguably the best mascot in the AFL, great modern success on the field, an emotive history and have pioneered a host of revenue-raising innovations. Despite these assets, they are the AFL's least popular club bar the plastic additions of Gold Coast Suns and GWS Somewhere. The Kangaroos' lack of popularity can be partially attributed to corporate machinations that have always battered the club at strategic level. These machinations have conspired to determine what competitions the club could play in, how it could define itself or whether it could play at all. In some regards, the club could be likened to factory workers turning up to work and performing admirably as corporate forces destroy their world for their own interests. In 1940, the Australasians said of the club, "In two aspects North Melbourne stands second to none. One is the loyalty of its supporters. The other is the determination to carry on, despite its disadvantages. In the face of adversity, which might well have broken the spirit of most men, we find that from the earliest days there were always enthusiasts to fight for North Melbourne." By the 1980s, that loyalty to supporters had waned to such an extent that the club was privatized, which allowed new shareholders to try to merge or relocate the club, all in the hope of increasing their personal profits. Not only did the schemes not work, they also weakened the affinity with fans and made it difficult to find new ones. Fortunately, in 2008, a fan revolt led to them taking ownership of the club once more. Although many were expecting the Kangaroos to become roadkill, the club managed to survive the battle to just play. North Melbourne joined the VFA in 1869. Although it didn't win a premiership, the club proved itself to be a well-supported and reasonably strong on the field. Initially, the club was known as the Shinboners. One story proposes that the name came from local butchers who displayed shin bones decorated in North Melbourne colours. Since the shin bone wasn't exactly the prime cut, it matched the image of club that did it tough while others enjoyed a sirloin steak. Another story proposes that it came from a local butcher who said that the players were so tight the club reminded him of blowflies on a shin bone. In a perverse sort of way, it was quite a compliment, not least of all because shin bone was a more upmarket description compared to the usual saying of flies on shit. A third story proposes that North players were dirty and liked to start fights with a kick to the shins. Although this gave the club somewhat of a little old lady quality, at least it was a more respectable image than that of a magpie hitting from behind that was associated with Collingwood. Whatever the origins of their name, North Melbourne's early years in the VFA were characterised by losses on the scoreboard, but consistent victories on the casualty count. The Shinboners developed a reputation as a team that would always give an honest contest and opponents would never win an easy ball. In 1896, Essendon and Geelong led a breakaway of clubs to form the VFL, but Essendon successfully lobbied against North Melbourne's inclusion even though the Shinboners were sixth on the ladder at the time. Essendon's concern was that its most successful recruiting suburbs were North Melbourne, West Melbourne and Kensington. Furthermore, North Melbourne's home ground was more centrally located, giving it stronger economic prospects. By excluding North, Essendon had a monopoly on the northwest region. To the North Melbourne's credit, it responded to the VFL's Essendon's rejection in an admirable manner. In the VFA, it became a powerhouse, winning premierships in 1903 and 1904. It also won a record of 59 games in a row. North again applied to join VFL in 1908 but was rejected once. To make matters worse, the VFA punished North Melbourne by excluding it from the VFA. To save the club, all committee members resigned to allow a new committee to form that was not tainted by the attempted defection. With the committee punished, the VFA allowed the club to continue. It went on to win more premierships in 1910, 1914, 1915 and 1918. In 1922, North Melbourne and Essendon proposed a merger. For North, the merger was an opportunity to enter the VFL. Meanwhile, Essendon wanted North's centrally located home ground. With the merger agreed in principle, North disbanded and sent their players to Essendon. This was highly problematic for the VFA as North was their only inner-city club, thus a key asset in their battle against the VFL. To protect their asset, the VFA persuaded the State Minister for Lands to veto Essendon's move to North's home ground. With Essendon unable to move, the merger was called off. Essendon found another ground, but with North Melbourne's champions Sid Barker and Charlie Hardy now playing for it. Meanwhile, North had to reform and find some players. As far as failed mergers go, it was the epitome of lose-win. With Essendon having almost 25 years head start and North's best players, it no longer saw the club as a threat. The VFL subsequently gave North an invitation to join the VFL in 1925. Given the circumstances of its entry, it was understandable that the club performed poorly on the field. Nevertheless, it gained a strong following. By 1937, the club had secured a staunch membership of 2,400, then a VFL record. In 1954, the club made its first innovation when it dropped Bombers in favour of the Kangaroos because it wanted something characteristically Australian. It remains the only club with a uniquely Australian mascot. In 1967, it made its second major innovation when it established the tradition of the Grand Final breakfast to mark the beginning of Grand Final Day. In recognition of its pioneering role, it remains the only breakfast to be officially sanctioned by the AFL. Throughout the 70s, the Kangaroos had even more success through giving opportunities to Aboriginal players. Although the club had recruited Aboriginal players back in the 1920s, the likes of Barry Cable became genuine superstars at a time that few clubs had any Aborigines on their lists. Cable's success was followed up with the recruitment of the Cracker brothers, who likewise proved themselves to be excitement machines. 1975 saw the club win its first premiership. A second followed in 1977. The premierships should have set it up for a golden era of off-field success, but like many VFL clubs, it got itself into financial difficulty. In 1985, it addressed some of the financial problems by pioneering Friday night football and so gained a monopoly on a primetime television to Meslet. Unfortunately, after taking the risks and proving it to be successful, other clubs started playing night footy and the Kangaroos were seen less on the screen. An additional way it tried to solve its financial problems was to sell shares in the club to private investors. Although selling shares was more dignified than the tin-rattling option taken by other clubs, tin-rattling pulled heartstrings and rallied the supporters in a way that casting an eye over a prospectus did not. Furthermore, selling shares denied supporters a voice and allowed corporate interests both inside and out to gain influence for their own interests. Instead of being guided by a Shimboner spirit, the board was guided by a blade stake spirit with dreams of Wagyu beef. The new shareholders decided that since they had put money into the club, they should make all the decisions. Considering the ridiculous statements football fans sometimes make, it was quite understandable that they believed they knew best. After all, anyone who has heard St Kilda fans predict they will win a premiership one day, or seen Collingwood fans struggle not to move their lips when reading anything larger than a comic book, would surely be wary of trusting football fans with a voice in a multi-million-dollar business. Although football fans are prone to say stupid things, they speak with their heart, and it is the voice of the heart that needs to be shown in order to attract new supporters. As the Richmond Tigers show, a club that seems passionate, and one that wears its heart on its sleeves, can still attract members even when it can win a game. While dumping a load of chicken manure on a club's doorstep may seem like a stupid way to motivate players, it does make the club look like it has a soul. In 1991, outside interest came from the Carlton Football Club when it attempted a hostile takeover of North Melbourne by purchasing a large parcel of shares formerly owned by Bob Ansett. Although the takeover was blocked by the AFL, it seemed to foreshadow an inevitable extinction. In 1993, the club looked like the end would come quickly. Performances had been poor since the 70s, the team list was bland and crowds tiny. In the pre-season, it lost to Adelaide by 147 points, which led to the sacking of coach Wayne Schimmelbusch. The prospectus was certainly looking poor. Schimmelbusch's replacement was Dennis Pagan, an ex-back pocket who had continued on with a low profile while coaching the Essendon reserves. Pagan's major innovation was to reinstate talk about a Schimboner spirit. It was a term that hadn't been used since the 50s, but it proved to be a powerful motivator. As one journalist noted, Pagan's much-loved Schimboner spirit was a phrase that often had the cynics rolling their eyes, but which reinforced over and over the impression that the Roos would never offer anything less than an honest contest. From pre-season basket case, the Roos finished the season in third place. 3 years later, they were premiers. While the club found the highest success on the field, it still had a corporate board that wanted a gold mine but felt North Melbourne was nothing but discarded tailings. In 1996, board decided to merge with the bankrupt Fitzroy on the belief it would expand the supporter base and provide access to more players. AFL clubs voted against the merger 14-1. North was the dissenting voter. Instead, Fitzroy's carcass was sent to Brisbane as it offered a better deal to the administrator. With merging being knocked back, in 1998 the shareholders tried market expansion by hatching a plan to become Sydney's second AFL team with 5 home games. So confident in their prospects, they dropped North Melbourne from their name to just be known as the Kangaroos, which they believed would fool Sydney sports fans into thinking they weren't really a Melbourne team. To support the Kangaroos, the AFL signed a contract to play 11 games a year at the Olympic Stadium from 2001 onwards, which was reconfigured to host Australian football on the basis of the contract. The Kangaroos' Sydney experiment was such a disaster that it never played at the ground. After the Sydney failure, the Kangaroos tried Canberra in 2002, where they didn't receive the same hostility but didn't receive the positive support either. While there was a certain dignity of the stoic working class that could only afford a shinbone, the constant rejection of a door-to-door salesman made the club look somewhat pathetic. To make matters worse, Captain Wayne Carey was caught having an affair with the wife of his then best friend and vice-captain Anthony Stevens. Even though Carey was considered possibly the greatest player of all time and essential to the team's success, his teammates refused to play alongside him ever again. He left the club and joined Adelaide the following year. Meanwhile, for all his years of championing a Schimboner spirit of persisting in the face of adversity, Dennis Pagan seemed to have become jaded at the constant hardship and moved on to Carlton in the belief it was a Silvertail club. Ironically, in his first year at the club, prior salary cap breaches were unearthed, causing it to be stripped of its draft selections. As much as Pagan would have loved to have spoken of a Silvertail spirit, or spirit of the cash-filled brown paper bags, he just lacked the motivating narrative, and his coaching tenure at Carlton was a failure. Meanwhile, North Melbourne struggled onwards. Canberra was another failure, so it signed an agreement to play 3 home games on the Gold Coast in another perpetual search for paying customers. In 2006, Queensland's Southport Sharks made another attempt at share purposes with an eye of moving the Kangaroos to the Gold Coast full-time. In 2007, the AFL put an ultimatum to the Kangaroos. Either they move to the Gold Coast or they are as good as dead. In a rare show of determination, the club rejected the ultimatum, reverted back to its North Melbourne name and vowed to fight on in Melbourne. At the time, the rejection was seen as a virtual act of suicide. That said, to accept the offer would have amounted to letting the people hit them with a semi-trailer, transfer them to a Gold Coast zoo, and sharpen the butcher's knives in preparation for an inevitable death. By choosing to fight on in Melbourne, the Kangaroos faced an almost certain death, but at least they would die with some dignity, and die with some fight. Against the odds, the club survived and reverted to a members-owned structure in 2008. Although its supporter base is the lowest in Melbourne and on-field performances are ordinary, it is financially stable enough to throw multi-million-dollar offers at star players from rival clubs, which are duly rejected, much like the Kangaroos were rejected by the cities of Sydney, Canberra and the Gold Coast. Nevertheless, in comparison to the other problems it has faced in its history, just being alive to make the offer was a victory in itself. Roy Morgan Research Kangaroos supporters are 2001 when compared to other Australians. 94% more likely as the average person to have drunk bourbon in the last 4 weeks. 43% more likely to have drunk scotch in the last 4 weeks. 27% more likely than the average person to vote for the ALP. 2004 when compared to other AFL supporters. 47% more likely to go to a theatre, restaurant, pub or cabaret for live entertainment. 46% more likely to have 3 or more children under 16 inches their household. 30% more likely to be paying off their home. 30% more likely to have played a sport. 36% more likely to have been to a nightclub disco. 28% more likely to believe they were born to shop. 2006 when compared to other AFL supporters. 20% more likely to love to do as many sports as possible. 24% more likely to agree they seldom have time for breakfast. 26% more likely to agree Australian beer is the only beer worth drinking. 37% more likely to have played a game of pool, snooker or billiards in the last 3 months. Kangaroos theme song: hearts to hearts and hands to hands, beneath the blue and white we stand. We shout God bless our native land. North Melbourne, North Melbourne. Out we come, out we come, out we come to play. Just for restoration's sake, to pass the time away, heaps of fun, lots of fun, enjoy yourself today. North Melbourne boys are hard to beat when they come out to play. So join in the chorus, and sing it one and all. Join in the chorus, North Melbourne's on the ball. Good old North Melbourne, we're champions, you'll agree. North Melbourne will be premiers, just you wait and see. They may not have many fans to sing it, but the Kangaroos have a great song. Rivalries: Carlton Blues. North Melbourne was once listed on the stock market and Carlton bought shares. Later there was talk of a merger, or more specifically, Carlton increasing its shareholdings. North fans didn't think kindly of either option, which made defeating Carlton in the 1999 grand final that much more special. Sydney Swans. The Kangaroos defeated the Swans in the 96 grand final. In the 98 and 99 seasons, they played 5 home games in Sydney, trying to bludge off the Swans' good work in raising the profile of the AFL in Sydney. The Swans didn't appreciate the Kangaroos' marketing and instigated the Boo-a-Roo campaign. In theory, this history should make for a good rivalry, but in one SCG game at the height of the feud, the clash only drew 14,000 fans. Collingwood Magpies. In 1999, Collingwood fans produced a banner that had a kangaroo in crosshairs and the slogan "Endangered Species," in reference to North Melbourne and fans being a contradiction in terms. Essendon Bombers. Because they drew supporters from the same area, Essendon managed to have North Melbourne excluded from the VFL when it broke away from the VFA in 1896. North Melbourne didn't enter the VFL until 1925, and they have blamed this lack of history as the reason it lacks Essendon's supporter base. In 1998, some North fans decided to inform Essendon of their softness by throwing marshmallows at coach Kevin Sheedy. North Melbourne's grand final victories in 96 and 1999 have both came against opponents that had defeated Essendon by a point in the preliminary final. For a while, Essendon saw defeating North as the flags they should have had. North Melbourne Kangaroo jokes. 1. What's the difference between Skippy and Wayne Carey? Skippy can root who he likes and still be a kangaroo. 1. What's the difference between North Melbourne and a Bingley store? Bingley has some fans. 2. The chief executive of Essendon, Richmond and North Melbourne were all invited to a party. The Essendon executive brought 6 bottles of Crown Lager. The Richmond executive brought a 6-pack of VB. The North Melbourne executive brought 6 friends. 3. The North Melbourne coach was playing the pokies and hit the jackpot with winnings of $20,000. "We've made it at last," he exclaimed to the team. "What are you going to do with the begging letters?" the team asked. "Keep sending them, I suppose," he replied. Icon Malcolm Blight, eccentric, tough and talented forward, coached the club for 1 year in 1981. Continued a nomadic coaching career with stints at Geelong, Adelaide and St Kilda. Sid Barker, ruckman who left North in 1921 to play with Essendon as part of a ploy to merge the teams. The merger never happened and Barker came back to North in 1927. David Inch, full-back who became the league's first rebounding attacking backman, not afraid to run off his opponent and set up goal-scoring opportunities. Jim Cracker, great talent who was often the victim of racial abuse aimed at making him play worse. Always stood up for himself and so had a habit of throwing punches at even the biggest of opponents. After retirement, was sentenced to 16 years prison, thus unable to watch his son Andrew make his debut. Wayne Carey, Ent's best ever player and also its most immoral, had to leave the club after it was revealed he was having an affair with the wife of Anthony Stevens, his best mate and club vice-captain. The affair was exposed after Carey and Mrs. Stevens ventured to the toilets while celebrating the birthday party of Glenn Archer's wife. Anthony Stevens, tough, hard-headed midfielder. One of the most courageous players in the club's history. Glenn Archer, arguably, the toughest player in the club's history. Backman who made opponents earn every kick. McMutton, huge hulk of a man who never lost a battle of strength. Jason McCartney, suffered severe burns in the 2002 Bali bombings. Returned to training and eventually played one final game. After getting back on the horse, announced his retirement.
So join in the chorus and sing